Good day. My name is Priska Blackett, and this is my capstone presentation. The title of my research is Investigating the Health Effects of Occupational Exposure to Petrol in Service Stations. This is my outline. I would first give an introduction highlighting objective and public health relevance. I would then give you the steps in my methodological process. I will give you some results, discuss those results, give recommendations for future studies, and then conclude. Now, the main objective of this study was to really measure the threats that chronic exposure to petrol has on gas station workers. My public health relevance is as follows. The negative effects of chronic exposure to petrol are lung cancer, aplastic anemia, pancytopenia, shortness of breath, upper respiratory irritation, conjunctivitis, blurred vision, leukemia. The prevalence of other symptoms among workers were headache, 61%, fatigue, 29%, and throat irritation, 11%. And for fatigue, benzene and toluene were significantly associated. In 2019, gas stations in the US alone used 143 billion gallons of gasoline. And of that number, 58% were transportation sector energy consumption. Furthermore, 92% of that sector was consumed by light-duty vehicles which use petrol. There were several concerns raised across articles relative to the health impacts that this occupation has on workers. The safety of the workers should be priority of any business. My methodology. This paper took the form of a literature review and it did not require IRB approval. Timeline of the study was from August 2019 to October 2019. The framework of analysis I used was conceptual framework, which took a problem to solution approach. The age of the literature was 10 years or less, and key terms were used in order to gather articles and they were screened for inclusion. Search engines included Medline, ResearchGate, Google Scholar, and EdSchool. These were effective in gathering qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method studies. The research question that I used were, what are the effects of prolonged occupational exposure to petrol on the health of workers in service stations? The sources were selectively chosen after evaluation of the reference list, and the chosen literature was initially scanned by reading the topic, the abstract, and introduction and conclusion of key sections. Supporting analytical questions were used to aid in writing the discussion. Trends were identified across various studies. An aspect of studies such as themes and methodologies, study design, and results were evaluated. Conflicts causing gaps to previous studies were addressed. Ultimately, recommendations were given for future research. Of over 100 articles which were found, 13 were selected based on the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Inclusion criteria. Article had to be 10 years or less. The studies had to highlight the components of petroleum. Studies around the globe which reported statistics on the relevant, independent, and dependent variables. The preferred study designs were case control and cohort. And the exclusion criteria was articles that were general and spoke more to industrial and factory workers and so forth. We wanted to keep it specific to gas station workers. My results were categorized into qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method studies. Some limitations were, one, gaps in the literature searching practices, and also the research took a more global approach in that it was hard to to direct the information to the Caribbean, since most of the articles that were gathered were from specific locations around the world. Some strengths include most articles used cohort studies. A problem to solution approach was taken. Conceptual or empirical review was done in order to recognize gaps and areas for improvement. Some results. And the main findings: petrol is made up of BTEX compounds and others, but the ones that are of grave concern is the BTEX compound, benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. Several articles utilize the guiding occupational exposure limits set by the NIOSH. And these were benzene, which was 0.1 ppm, toluene 100 ppm, ethylbenzene 100 ppm, xylene 100 ppm. Now the problem: BTEX compounds are in high concentrations in gas stations due to evaporation during the refueling process. And a study of air samples from the breeding zone of the exposed workers gave a significantly higher mean than in the controls. So you will see that the concentration in benzene, xylene, and toluene in this study was significantly higher than those found in the controls. Qualitative studies. Individual effect of BTEX compound was elaborated on. So benzene is carcinogenic and is also associated with bone marrow failure, plastic anemia, and other syndromes. Toluene is associated with weakness, confusion, memory loss, loss of appetite, nausea, hearing, and vision loss. Ethylbenzene is also a potential carcinogen, and xylene's effect is more directed toward the central nervous system. Now, in a study in Ghana, what stuck with me was the fact that Ghana does not have a legislation that speaks to occupational and environmental health and safety for workers, right? So this probably was one of the problems that led to a higher probability of pump attendants developing health conditions in Ghana. In Brazil, benzene ambient exposure extended from 46.72 to 435 micrograms per cubic meter. Now note that this range is a lot higher than the exposure limit set for benzene. The other three, however, did not cross the limit, the exposure limit set by the NIOSH. So it's noted here that benzene is the compound that we need to look out for. Mixed method studies. A comparison was done between office workers and pump attendants. This was in Italy, and the results showed that there was a reduction in the functionality of the lungs found in pump attendants versus the controls. Now, my discussion. Strengths across the studies. Most researchers took into consideration the height of an average human being when placing air samples, which was important. Most researchers also were guided by occupational exposure limits set by the NIOSH, which is credible. Utilization of passive samplers were used in some of the studies, and this is more effective and cost efficient, and it's also a more natural process than the active samplers, because you get an accurate count as to how much benzene the workers are exposed to. Weaknesses: unavailability and inaccessibility of research articles in other locations, such as the Oceania, North and Central America, and Caribbean countries. And very little work was done to investigate chronic petrol exposure on other body systems. Most of them were limited to lung function and toxicology in blood and urine. Several articles didn't specify whether the possible confounding effect of smoking or living conditions was controlled for. No study in the Caribbean, which is a tropical region, was done. And there was also no general global statistic on the problem. We had to look in different countries for research done specifically in those countries, but there was no general global paper done. Recommendations. When carrying out studies, the most cost-efficient way is to use, especially for air sampling, is to use a natural process called passive air sampling. Also, some important confounders to consider are workers who smoke, who live in industrial neighborhoods, or near the highway, because these are sources of VTEX compounds. Petrol impact on gas station workers previously can be investigated by a retrospective cohort study. In conclusion, chemical hazards in the workplace are influenced by public policy, regulation, mechanical controls, administrative and behavioral measures like systems of work supervision and training. Petrol comprises of VTEX compounds. Prolonged occupational exposure causes a negative health outcome in workers. As service station workers, more so pump attendants experience a higher risk of exposure than the customers. These compounds will continuously affect these workers if measures are not taken to counteract this problem. These are my references. Thank you.